You know, our modern understanding of nuclear safety wasn't born in some quiet, sterile lab. Nope, it was forged in tragedy. It was paid for, quite literally, with the lives of people who came face to face with an invisible, lethal force. In this explainer, we're going to uncover some of those human stories behind the safety regulations we now just take for granted. Rules that were written not in ink, but an absolute tragedy.
It's a really terrifying question, isn't it? I mean, we think of radiation as this thing you can't see, you can't hear, you can't feel. But for a few unlucky people, it had a very, very distinct appearance, usually right before the end.
This is Hashishi Ochi. He was a 35-year-old technician at a nuclear fuel plant in Tokaimura, Japan. And on September 30th, 1999, he and his team were in a hurry, trying to meet a deadline. And to save a little bit of time, they took a shortcut that would turn out to be absolutely fatal.
So, what they did was mix 7 times the legal limit of uranium, and they did it by pouring it by hand into a simple steel bucket. In that split second, the solution went critical. A flash of blue light, that eerie blue glow, erupted right in front of him. Oshi was standing just 2 feet away from a self-sustaining nuclear reaction that he had created by accident.
In less than a second, his body soaked up 17 sieverts of radiation. Now let's just put that number into perspective for a second. Just 5 sieverts is considered fatal for about half the people who get exposed to it. Ochi absorbed more than 3 times that amount. It was a dose of radiation that no human being had ever survived before. The radiation essentially shredded his DNA. His body completely lost the ability to make new cells. After 83 days of just unimaginable suffering, Hishashi Ochi died. But his tragedy forced a massive reckoning in Japan. It led to the plant being shut down for good and a complete overhaul of the entire country's nuclear safety regulations.
Okay, so that was a single horrific event. But sometimes the danger isn't a process, it's the object itself. So for this next story, we're going to head over to Los Alamos, New Mexico, to meet a sphere of plutonium so deadly it actually earned the nickname the Demon Core.
Now get this. In less than a year, this one softball-sized piece of plutonium killed 2 brilliant young physicists. In August of '45, Harry Daghlian was working alone, and he accidentally dropped a brick right onto the core, which started a reaction. Just 9 months later, Louis Slotin was showing off a pretty dangerous procedure when his screwdriver slipped. And in both cases, their instincts, their last actions, were just unbelievably heroic. Daghlian used his bare hand to shove the brick off the core. Slotin ripped the 2 halves of the assembly apart with his own hands, saving everyone else in the room. But in saving their colleagues, they sealed their own fates. Daghlian lasted 25 days, Slotin only 9. These 2 deaths just shattered the almost cavalier, hands-on approach they had back then. Those dangerous experiments were banned immediately. Remote machinery became mandatory for any similar work. And the Demon Core itself? It was melted down, its deadly legacy finally put to an end.
All right, but what happens when it's not a person's hand that slips, but the safety design itself that's just fundamentally broken? These next 2 stories show what can happen when the equipment, or the total lack of it, is what creates the disaster.
It's December 30th, 1958. A chemical operator named Cecil Kelly is at Los Alamos, doing what he thinks is a routine job, mixing plutonium in a large tank. But here's the thing. Unbeknownst to him, the tank was designed in a way that let plutonium residue collect at the bottom. The moment he turned on the stirrer, he accidentally created a critical mass. And, once again, there it was, that brilliant flash of blue light.
Kelly was standing right over the tank. He absorbed a massive, massive dose and died in just 5 hours. His death forced a fundamental change in how they thought about safety. Equipment now had to be designed with what's called fail-safe geometry. Basically, its very shape should make it physically impossible to form a critical mass, even if a person messes up.
Now, for a failure of a totally different kind. Not a flawed design, but the complete absence of a backup system. In 1961, the Soviet nuclear submarine K-19 had a major reactor coolant leak while at sea. There was no backup cooling system. The only way to stop a catastrophic nuclear explosion was for men to physically go inside the reactor compartment and weld the pipe by hand.
22 men volunteered for what was, for all intents and purposes, a suicide mission. They went in small teams, knowing they were absorbing lethal radiation in just minutes. 8 of them died within days, 14 more within 2 years. They were all buried in lead coffins. And you have to understand the stakes here. Their sacrifice didn't just save their ship. It prevented a nuclear disaster that could have easily been mistaken for a U.S. attack, possibly kicking off World War III. So far, we've been talking about accidents, but radiation's invisibility, its silence, well, that also makes it a uniquely terrifying weapon. In 2006, the world watched as it was used for a brazen political assassination right in the heart of London.
The weapon of choice? Polonium-210. It is one of the most toxic substances known to man. The target was Alexander Litvinenko, a former Russian spy who had become a very vocal critic of Vladimir Putin. On November 1, 2006, during a meeting in a hotel, a lethal, completely undetectable dose was slipped right into his cup of tea.
He died a slow and agonizing death 3 weeks later. But the assassins weren't as clever as they thought. The use of this incredibly rare radioactive isotope left a trail all across London, in hotels, restaurants, even on airplanes. The murder ignited a massive diplomatic crisis between the UK and Russia that went on for years.
But let's rewind a bit, back to a more naive time. The early 20th century, when radiation wasn't seen as a poison, but as a miracle cure. This is the story of how a popular health fad turned into an absolute public health disaster.
Meet Eben Byers. He was a wealthy industrialist, a socialite, a champion golfer. After he hurt his arm, his doctor prescribed something called Radiathor, which was literally just radium dissolved in water. Byers became convinced it was a miracle cure. He started drinking it like it was water, downing an estimated 1,400 bottles over the course of 3 years.
You see, radium is chemically similar to calcium, so it deposited itself directly into his bones, irradiating him from the inside out. His health collapsed in the most horrific way, and surgeons eventually had to remove his entire jaw. When he finally died, the Wall Street Journal ran this now infamous gut punch of a headline that just shocked the whole country.
The public horror over what happened to Eben Byers was a direct catalyst for change. It led straight to the passage of the 1938 Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which for the very first time gave the FDA real power to regulate medical products and demand proof that they were safe.
So, as we've seen story after story, from accidental exposures to deliberate poisonings to deadly so-called medicines, our safety rules are rarely proactive. They are almost always reactive, born from someone suffering.
I mean, the connection is undeniable, right? Ochi's death forced Japan to completely overhaul its safety system. The Demon Core accidents, they ended hands-on experiments forever. Cecil Kelly's death created the entire principle of fail-safe design. And Eben Byers' gruesome end gave the FDA its modern authority. Every single safety standard we rely on today was pretty much built on the sacrifice of those who came before.
These stories are such a stark reminder that our shield of regulations, it was written in tragedy. And it really forces us to ask a tough question. What invisible dangers are we maybe growing complacent about now? And what price will we pay for forgetting the hard-won lessons that these people taught us?